The student movement around the world is probably one of the most remarkable advents that I personally have been privy to. I mean, for decades now, I've campaigned for so many cases, and I've seen reactions, many of which positive. I was one of the leaders of the 2 Million March in London, which is till now the biggest in the history of public demonstrations against the war in Iraq, as well as. But this seems different. This seems to be fairly striking for a number of reasons, not only the kind of size and expanse, but also who's involved. I mean, we're talking about Ivy League universities. We're talking about the creme de la creme, if you wish, of American society. We're talking about a majority of white, middle-class Americans who are potentially the future leaders of America, future leaders of industry, of politics, of law and security and the such. And those are the people who are now condemning Zionism. They're attacking Israel. They're charging Israel with the crime of genocide, and they're raising the Palestinian flags, calling, for a free Palestine, Palestine from the river to the sea, amid a crackdown, the likes of which we haven't seen since Vietnam. You're too young to remember that. I wasn't born then, but even so, the images of the National Guard being called into university campuses to disperse, to arrest, to beat up protesters, are there. And today we have, something reminiscent to that. And we also have people who are threatened in terms of their positions, their studies and the like. People being expelled, yet they come back and return to the protesting ranks. In your estimation, how does all of this figure? Where did this all start? And probably most importantly, where do you think this is heading?
No, I agree with you. This has been remarkable. And secondly, obviously, when you see the history of student activism on campus, the United States, it stands a little different in terms of history as well. And you rightly said, I'm not old enough to remember Vietnam, but since we can see from the history that these student movements, they had a very influential and impactful role back in the time of Vietnam War, and then in the apartheid regime of South Africa, in times of Nelson Mandela, when the white government was taken over and was changed. There are some similarities which we can draw with these student movements who have worked in the past or who have been there in the past. And if I put it in words of one of the professors of New York University, if I rightly remember, his name is Robert Cohen, and he said it may not be as big as something that was in the time of Vietnam War, or maybe in the time of South African apartheid and the movement against it in the 1980s, but we may still call it the biggest student movement of the 21st century. And I think it's a very big thing. Why is it big? Because like you just said, even though we normally, many of us, not everybody, would count this Palestinian issue or the Gaza massacre as something more of a Muslim issue, but something intrinsically arising from within the US universities and transforming into such a large scale, movement. It's very remarkable. And I think it also shows us light down the tunnel. So I agree on that part. And the second part of it, when you talk about the response to it, if I make use of extreme euphemism even, in the slightest words, I would have to call it has showed us also the double face of the politicians, the university administrations, and how they are influenced by the politicians and the international establishment, maybe, if I can say. And one example is, I think, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson, probably his name is. So even though in the Columbia University where this all started, even though the president was so swift in calling police and arresting more than 100 students the same day, still Mike Johnson called for for her or his resignation for not dealing with the protests very swiftly.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think there are some similarities.
You know, I come from, I hail from the Arab part of the world, albeit I've virtually never lived there. But you know, one of the things we always say is that there is this detachment between people and governments. And the extraordinary thing that we see in America, but also in the UK, across many countries in Western Europe, we're seeing this this detachment also emerge. We're seeing this disbelief, you know, in terms of the young, their attitude towards governments, towards authorities. That this might have roots in the anti-police brutality movement that's emerged over the course of the past 10 years, let's say, but particularly since George Floyd and the like. But now it's grown to include those in government, those representatives in Congress and the like, and in our case, in Parliament and in positions of power. How do you see this evolving? I mean, how, to what extent will because bear in mind, I mean, like I said, these are the future leaders of America that we're talking about. So how will this impact the next, I don't know, 2, 5, 10, 15 years?
I think this portrays a very positive picture of, like, you know, the fact that even if the governments in, like, you know, let me bring the debate back to, again, the South African case of apartheid. So there are many experts who do claim that the politicians would at that time try to disassociate themselves because they did not want to be called or framed complicits in the apartheid. We are seeing something very different today. So even though there are these student protesters who are calling an end to this massacre or the gruesome visuals which we are observing on the television every day, which is happening in Gaza, at the same time, there are people who are not ashamed of being called complicit to this all which is being done from the Israeli side. So if you see in this context, it is very important that despite having this part of the society which is at the helm of affairs and power, we still have a ray of hope coming from the youth, from the students who have their say, and who are calling wrong as wrong, like, you know, who are having their voice and raising their voice. And this voice is very intrinsic, like, you know, this does not come from any external influences. This is what they feel and they are expressing their voice. So I see a lot of hope in this, like, you know, in this reality, at least.
And in comparison, once again, looking at the state of the reaction in the Arab world, for instance, which is just a few hundred miles away from where all of this is happening, you sort of once again think that, you know, things are moving in the West whilst things are sort of paralyzed in what we call the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa.
Exactly, even though it would not justify, you know, like, you know, stating why is it, I mean, stating the reason would not justify what is happening. But still, you know, I mean, we need to accept that there are autocracies in the Middle East. So in terms of political sociology, there is no concept of the public having its voice, or, like, you know, its voice being heard in terms of if there are any movements, they only come out in terms of things like Arab Spring, and obviously you have seen the fate of it. So there are no channels to voice your concerns in whole that region. That is an unfortunate thing, but that's a reality. And for this reason, you see more of these cases in the West, where there is more freedom, you know, I mean, something that we need to accept, like, be it students or other parts of the society, like you've just mentioned, your very remarkable protest against the Iraq war, that so far to date is the biggest one, in terms of the number of people marching out on streets. So I think this gives us an opportunity to reflect upon ourselves as well. Like, where do we stand in terms of Muslim societies compared to the Western societies, and in terms of our governments compared to their governments? But again, it would not be very, I think, justified, or it would not be very fair to label all the Muslim bloc under a single title, or in one picture. For example, if there's another reason to it as well. A lot of these protests, let's see what is their basic aim, or what is their basic objective. So if we take it from BDS, like boycott, divestment, and sanctions, so it refers to the second word, which is divestment. So these universities, unlike many universities in the Muslim countries, they do have their investments in the Israeli companies, and which are directly involved in the war crimes, I would say, or which are directly involved in the weapon industry of Israel. For example, Lockheed Martin, and then BAE Systems is there, and if other industries, Boeing is also, so you can name a lot of them. And I think if you want to see the amount of it, I think over $375 million in the last only 20 years that has been invested by only the US colleges or universities into these companies. So I think this is also one fact. So basically, there is one objective in the US universities which the students are calling for, which is not present in the Muslim world. So for example, if you talk about Turkey, there have been some protests in the Turkish universities, but they are more of symbolic, so just to raise voice, as making sure or showing that, they are with their Gazan brothers, or they are with their Palestinian brothers. But this fact of investing in Israel, or having a direct link, or being complicit in the crime themselves, is not present in these universities. So that may be one reason we see a more lukewarm response in the Muslim countries.
Is it at all? I mean, you're settled and work from Turkey, and therefore you'd know about the scene more than most, and you have that kind of perspective that you are a non-Turk, so you can shed light from a different perspective and a different dimension, if I may. How do you find the issue of what happened in Gaza and is continuing to happen now? It's been 7 months. Generally speaking, on Turkish society, but particularly on the student movement.
In general, if you would want me to compare, because I can compare over years. In general terms, obviously, Palestine is a very, important issue for the Turkish citizens, for the Turkish Muslims especially. And you always find it very easy to have very big protests or mass movements whenever there is an aggression from Israeli side on the Palestinians. And I have witnessed it in the previous years. And the government has a similar response normally. There was a little difference this time. I don't know what was the reason. I would rather say it was lesser in its extent, because I can recall only a couple of protests, which took place, even though they were large in numbers, they were massive in numbers, but still there were only a couple of them, keeping in view that, they've been long 7 months since this aggression has started. And it was a little baffling for me, but again, the reasons may have been because in this time frame, Turkey has been entering and coming out of election phases twice. They just had their by-election and internal politics going on. A lot of it was going on. Then obviously, besides that, when we compare in the Muslim countries, Turkish government has been very vocal and very active in terms of its involvement for protecting the rights of Palestinians. So if I can, mention as an example, Turkish government just it's been over a week when they they have banned or they have abolished all the trade with Israel, and that amounts to over $7 billion, I guess. So probably these may be the reasons. So an economy, because Turkish economy has been a very hot topic in the Turkish internal society here. So when I compare over the years, I have seen the response to be lesser, despite the fact that what is happening in Gaza is more gruesome today.
Do you think that the results of the local elections of late they were impacted by Gaza? Do you think, or was it more internal issues, particularly like you say, the economy?
I think it was more of internal issues, but still, as an observer, as I say, or if I frame it in terms of my interaction with the locals, I think this issue also had an impact. Though the impact was not very large, but this issue had an impact. And probably, if you want to see the impact of this issue, I think you have to see that there's a far right party. I would not call it far right, but the right party of which is New Rifa, Yeniden Rifa. I think I can call the names.
Or the New Welfare Party.
New Welfare Party, exactly. Run by Najmuddin Erbakan's son.
Yeah, Fatah.
So if you compare its performance in the previous election and today's election, there is, it gives you a lot of reflection into the results or how the people have voted. Exactly. And secondly, there's another thing to it. Normally, when it's the local body elections, this is the performance for which you are being voted.
Yes.
And Yeniden Rifa or the New Welfare Party did not have any mayoral elections before.
It's very strange.
It's very strange. So from those statistics or figures, you may calculate that yes, this also had an impact. But the impact was not like 10 or 20% of the vote, but still it was a significant impact on the voting pattern, I think.
You hail from Pakistan. And obviously, Pakistan is a major country when we're talking about, the sort of eastern of the Middle East.
The Muslim bloc, maybe.
And the subcontinent with all its complexities.
Yeah.
When you're talking about India, you're talking about Pakistan, you're talking about Bangladesh. You can, if you wish, add, for instance, Afghanistan to the mix. It has a very complex...
Even
Iran, probably, yes, absolutely. And, Pakistan borders China and borders, it's such a fascinating map that from which emerges an incredibly complex political, geopolitical, as well as demographics sort of reality. And obviously the events of the last many years since the Afghanistan war, and even as recent as the deposing of the elected Prime Minister Imran Khan, for instance. All of that. What kind of image emerges to someone who's looking onto this region, recognizes that you have two established nuclear powers, India and Pakistan, and one which is closely to be joining the nuclear club, such as Iran. And then you look at the complexities, like I said, of people, the diversity, the culture, and then you have China with its expansion of the Belt Road that reaches into the very, heart of Africa, coming through this. The conflict between Iran and the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, the Muslim world. You have the rise of Indian nationalism, for instance, that we've seen since Narendra Modi.
Nationalism can be euphemism for it as well.
It could be, absolutely, yes. Yes,
because it's farther than just nationalism anymore.
Correct. And we'll talk about this. But generally speaking, if you were to briefly try to describe where Pakistan and the Pakistani people stand, what the main challenges are, and what is the future outlook?
I mean, obviously, it's not a very simple question.
Of
It's
course.
as complex as Pakistani position itself.
Yeah.
So we are blessed in a way that we are strategically located in an important position or in an important geographical region, similar to Turkey. Like when you see Turkey in terms of being at the bottleneck of Europe, but like this strategic position brings you like some blessing. It brings you a lot of challenges as well. So obviously when you've described, like I would not shy away from describing that out of the four neighbors we have, three of the neighbors, uh, I mean, we always have challenges from those borders. So just imagine, like a country being surrounded by four countries and just having peace, or like just not having an issue only on one of the borders it shares, and that is relatively a smaller one, very small one, with China, and always having conflict on the other three, be it Afghanistan, be it Iran, or be it India. And this conflict not coming sometimes only from directly from these states, but these states being used by some bigger powers at times. For example, like in times before this recent takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan, in the time of the previous government, if I rightly remember, only India had in Afghanistan at that time over 17 consulates, and obviously they were operating there for a reason. So obviously these all bring challenges, and on the top, it's not just that. Uh, this is like mixed up, or this the economic challenge also adds up to it, and nonetheless, not just the economic challenge. There are further challenges, like you just mentioned about the uh, ousting, I would say, or like the change of the regime of Imran Khan government, and a lot of people believing it not to be very internal game, like it also being a very planned, or a game being played from the outer.
Induced by foreign powers.
Sorry, say it again.
Some are suggesting even induced by foreign powers.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
By America.
Exactly. Like in their words, they call it a regime change directly done by the US through the people they can influence. So obviously there are a lot of people believing that as well. So you can just imagine. So these are all difficulties. If I say, like there are political difficulties. Alhamdulillah, we are blessed in one way. When I see in other countries, like I see in Turkey, there are only Turks and Kurds, and there are two or three languages. But when I see, like this mosaic which is in Pakistan, we have got Kashmiris, we have got Pashtuns, we have got Balochis, Sindhis, and a lot more, like the subgroups as well, and their languages, and they being populated in different regions of Pakistan. And I feel blessed not having challenges from these diversities. Like these diversities at least are not playing very negatively, though they are being used at times. For example, like we do have problem when we do have foreign intervention uh, on the side of Iranian border in Balochistan, and similarly Pashtuns, when there are these splinter groups of Taliban. When I say Taliban, it's not the Afghani Taliban. There were groups which used to call them Taliban within Pakistan, and they were involved in all these bomb blasts which were happening in Pakistan, and in which hundreds of thousands, not just thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, like they were killed in them. So these all are very big challenges for Pakistan. I mean, it would be difficult to say which one is the biggest one, but as of now, I think economic challenge even for Pakistan is not a very small challenge. For example, if we have like an improvement on the economic side, at least this not only gives us a little peace in terms of like our internal stability, it also gives us I think the strength to make our own decisions. So because a part of the issue which is being influenced by the US of any government, no matter it's Imran Khan, Nawaz Sharif, I mean, I don't want to say who was more influenced by the foreign powers, but this fact of not having the strength of taking independent decisions, a lot of this comes from the fact that we are not economically independent. And obviously this economic independence, this is then packed with the corruption, which again comes from our politicians. And and I would even include military establishment. I would not shy away from saying that, because when it comes to this all, they also abet the politicians in crime. So, because politicians at the end of the day are used by this military establishment the way they please. And if you want to say politically, I would say for Pakistan, this military establishment is the biggest of the problems. Why so? Because we cannot trust our elections. We cannot trust we are having our say. For example, I will just give you a small example from the recent elections which were held in Pakistan. So it was same in the whole in the whole country. But if I give you only one example from a city, the biggest city in terms of population is Karachi. So there's a party which is supported by the military establishment in Karachi, which gained over 100,000 votes. And there's another party now, an Islamic party, that gained 700,000 votes, almost 700,000 votes. Can you imagine that this party, which has 100,000 votes, they won 15 representatives in the National Assembly, and the other party, the Islamic party, that had 700,000 votes, they had no representative. So this is the state of affairs.
But is it comparable? I don't know whether you would know this, but when you're describing the military state in Pakistan and the influence on public life as well as on politics and the such, you're reminding me of Egypt. Would it be sort of because in Egypt, I mean, the farcical thing is that the military is also in charge of the production of food and pasta and sugar and the such. They own land, which they rent out, they lease to local farmers and the such.
See, this is very interesting. Exactly like you explained the Egyptian military, some of the biggest businesses being run in Pakistan, they are directly owned by the military. And obviously, I mean, they're using up resources on that, obviously. And this includes eatables, like you said. This includes pasta. And then, bigger than that, they are directly involved in the real estate business.
Yep.
The biggest one, because this is the key. So when you have got the real estate, you're controlling the monetary side of it. But there's a difference as well when you compare establishment in Pakistan with the Turkish and Egyptian establishment. I think our establishment plays smarter because they do not directly involve themselves. I mean, they're staging everything, or this theater run by them. They are doing everything they're controlling everything from behind the curtains, but they don't come in front of the cameras like the cases of Turkey in the history, or like the Egyptian case, where the generals would come very directly and they would show their involvement in the affairs. So in Pakistan, everybody knows, but if you want to deny, nothing is on the surface which you can say. I mean, this is the direct involvement which you can see on the surface.
Coming back to Gaza, how has that impacted Pakistan, the Pakistani people?
See, if you ask my personal opinion, I am a little disappointed overall with all the Muslim countries and their response.
Including Pakistan.
Even though one reason may be because we were discussing it in another meeting, the reasons behind this lukewarm response of the Muslim countries. One reason may be, Pakistan does not recognize Israel. Pakistan cannot directly influence many of the things. We are not in a geographical proximity with Israel. And then all we can do is raise awareness internally and maybe do human relief efforts. Alhamdulillah, one good thing is we do have, I just got to know from some of people who are directly involved in this, in the non-profit industry in Pakistan, that in terms of human relief efforts, despite not having any direct, linkages to Israel, they still are doing a lot of work, relief work, the humanitarian aid work through Lebanon, through Egypt, and through Turkish NGOs. non-governmental organizations. That's the good side of it. But when you see it on the societal level, probably it may again be the political reasons may again be the cause, or the economic reasons. But at the end of the day, if you see the result, it's disappointing. We did not see, we just saw a couple of mass gatherings that also staged by a particular political party, Jamaat Islami in Pakistan. But when you say in terms of civil society, or everybody coming out for the Muslim brothers which are being butchered, and they are under an aggression, we did not see any such an indication or such a response from this society in general in Pakistan, and which is very unfortunate. Same goes for the students. So in Pakistan, for example, even though had they done it, it would have been symbolic only. But even symbolic protests are very important at these times. We did not see, at least I cannot remember or recall even one of them, which was massive or which took place, and the reason was, and when you're talking about this, it's not something that has been going on only for a day or a week or a month. It's been 7 long months. And 7 long months and you being inactive means either you disassociate, or you feel an isolated position with them, or you at least are not thinking anymore them as your brothers, who are in pain. And this is a very unfortunate reality.
And that's a problem. Let me ask you about...
But before we move on to the next question, one reason giving them a benefit of doubt, be it Turkey, be it Pakistan, one reason maybe... So when I said about the US universities, see, there's a difference even in the student uprising in the US and the UK and other places. Why? Because in the US universities, they directly have an objective, and they directly know that the university administration or the universities themselves have a direct involvement, and they are abetting Israel in the crime which it is committing, because that thing is not existing. So be it Turkey or Pakistan, all they can call for is their government may be protesting on the international forums, maybe using OIC more efficiently or something. So probably because on the sides of objectives or aim of these kind of protests, there are no direct aims as they are in the US universities. That may be one reasons they have not gathered in mass.
But generally speaking, is it fair to say that regardless of the presence or absence of these symbolic either vigils or protests or whatever, public demonstrations, that the Pakistani people are absolutely in support of their Palestinian brothers? I mean, is that a fair thing to say? And I ask that deliberately because whilst we might assume that, for instance, all Arab or Muslim nations are naturally, of course, they're going to support that. But at the same time, we've seen certain Arab nations particularly, make efforts in order to assist the Israeli side, to, fight the corner of the Israelis. So we've seen that. I mean, it might be absolutely mind-boggling, but it's happened. So what's the situation in Pakistan?
No, alhamdulillah, absolutely. For Pakistan, that may again be one reason, because people think themselves as very pro-Palestinian.
Yeah, so they're already there.
They're already there.
Yeah.
It's just like, when you think you are too Muslim and, you're not doing what a Muslim is required to do.
Yes.
So probably people thinking themselves of being very pro-Palestinian, but just giving themselves an excuse of not having any avenue or a way of expressing this support for Palestinians. But this absolutely is there, because you will randomly ask Pakistanis, and I can bet on that, you would not find a single Pakistani probably you come across not in support of Palestinians. And obviously because we don't recognize Israel.
Yes.
You'll see Pakistanis when coming across Palestinian brothers very proudly showing them their passport, like, which has this inscribed on it. It has
Yes.
inscribed on it
Yes.
that this
That
is
you
valid.
can travel anywhere in the world
Yeah, this
apart
is
from
valid for
Israel.
all countries of the world except Israel. One thing I wanted to add, which I missed out earlier, in Pakistan, the student uprising thing or being low on that front is also because of some political, reasons which are historic. So in Pakistan, when we had an autocrat government or the dictator named Ziaul Haq, who was liked by many despite being a dictator, in 1984, he banned all the student bodies. So the student elections were banned in the colleges and universities. So since then, there was only one instance in 1989 when the elections were held again, but they were banned again because the party which was in the government, their supported student organizations lost very badly. So we can say since 1984.
So the natural reaction would be to ban them.
Yeah. But I would still say that it's since 1984, since this student activism in its legal form has been banned from the campuses. So it's not just on Palestine, it's on all the issues, even on the internal issues. You don't see a lot of student activism.
Understood.
If the only way you can see this response of the youth is through elections, but at least on campus, there is not a lot of student activism you may have seen there.
So let's talk about some of those internal issues. Let me touch on an issue which has been there for as long as Palestine, and the case for Palestine has been there, and that's the issue of Kashmir. And I have to say, from my recent examination, I wouldn't say that I actually knew about Kashmir before I actually started reading, meeting with Kashmiris, people who are activists for Kashmir and such, that I started to understand a little bit more about the issue. And this is an issue which influences somehow or another Pakistan, of course.
It should influence the Muslim world.
It should. Shouldn't it? I mean, since 1947, when Kashmir has been occupied, and it's something of a concern, especially amid human rights abuses that have been committed and the like. Where does Kashmir fall within the psyche, let's say, of Pakistanis, and particularly young Pakistanis? You see, one of the things I've noticed, and it's quite interesting, and this happens not only for Westerners, but also people across the world. And that is the generations are attached to various things differently. So my father's attachment to a particular cause might not be as much as I'm attached to it, and vice versa. And the same with my children. So the question is, how attached, how understandable, how comprehending is the younger Pakistanis to the issue of Kashmir?
See, in terms of the atrocities going on in Kashmir, the Indian occupied part, it's no lesser than, maybe in extent, maybe a little lesser than a genocide that is going on in Palestine, by Israel. But in terms of the happenings of the valley, what is being done by the Indian forces in that small region where there are more than 700,000 soldiers deployed, the atrocities are not any lesser. So people are being killed, they are being abducted, Muslim women are being raped, people are forced to flee from that region in order to save their lives. A lot of them are relocated in different parts of the world who cannot go back. Having said so, very shortly, unfortunately, this is true for the Kashmiri issue as well. So it has lost the attention generation to generation, So the newer generations are not as informed, as associated, and as attached to the issue of Kashmir as the older generations were. But I would not just blame that on time. While it may happen, for some of the cases, it may happen just because of the time has passed and the things are very not very new, and there are not systems to uh, transfer this legacy and history to the newer generation, like it has happened partly in Turkey in on the issues of hijab. And the hijab ban, it has not it's not no more that important in terms of the newer youth in Turkey. And one reason is because they have not witnessed it. Had they witnessed it, it would have been a deciding factor for them as well in terms of their political preferences. In Pakistan, I would say it's been worst, or it's worse than only people forgetting a cause because the time has passed. I think Kashmir is also a victim of changing priorities of our establishment and the governments. So, under the influence of the US, the Western powers, or other reasons, Kashmir has also been a victim of their changing priorities, especially post 2001, post Afghan war. And this is a very sad reality. And very interestingly, even though the extent of atrocities in Kashmir has increased over that time, the attention given by Pakistan to that issue has decreased. And this is very sad. And obviously, like I've said, this partly is because of them being influenced. For example, if they have to economically move to IMF for their needs, if they have to move to Saudi bloc for their needs, and if they have to go to when moving to IMF means moving to US and its bloc. So obviously they have to pay the price on the other things, and one of them is Kashmir. And due to this, Kashmiris are suffering even more. So Hindustan, or India, it brought in new laws on 5th of August some years ago. That is exactly relocating, turning the majority of Muslims in the region into minority, but bringing in the non-Muslims from the Indian region, giving them perks and offering them perks and privileges for just relocating into the valley and allowing them to buy land in that area. So while India is doing this cleansing very systematically, Pakistan has not been as active on this matter as it was before. And this is very sad. And obviously that is one reason our newer generation has also lost track of how important the issue is. And not just in terms of the geographical land being part of Pakistan. And the interesting fact is, it's something about which it's been over 50 years, the United Nations already has resolutions. There needs to be a plebiscite there. And obviously, just imagine the scenario is once India would systematically turn the majority into minority in this valley, which it has started doing, then they would not have any harm in even doing a plebiscite.
Well, where does Pakistan align itself in terms of global politics? I mean, is it closer to let's say, the American or the Western camp, or is it closer to China, Russia even? I mean, in terms of its war with Ukraine and the like, but also in terms of its global, its geopolitical influence in that part of the world. Where does Pakistan find itself?
See, on the world level, I would say, if we imagine it as a bipolar world, which is not anymore probably, Pakistan has historically aligned itself more towards United States, and it was even pre-Afghan war. And obviously, after the Afghan war, this stance could not be changed because we were directly engaging with the Russians, which were there in Afghanistan. So we were directly fighting with them, or at least the fighters were being aided and supported, and Pakistan was their station from where they were being launched. So for that historical reason, we have not been in the Russian bloc, and in the near future, it does not look we are going to be. We may call ourselves in the American bloc, but again, the same thing. In the American bloc, though we align ourselves not very proudly with America, but we have not received anything from being in that bloc either. For example, in the wars which we have fought against India, so even though India was directly in the Russian bloc and we were in the American bloc, and while India was receiving aid or like help or diplomatic help from Russia, Pakistan did not receive anything or any help from the United States. Coming to China, like I've said, since we have got 4 borders and 4 neighbors, and 3 of them are hostile, I would say, towards Pakistan. Iran for its own reasons, the Sunni bloc and Shia bloc reason, Afghanistan because of the historic reason of changing regimes there, and a lot of this dates back to the Russian invasion of Afghanistan and Pakistan's role back then, and India naturally, since the formation of Pakistan, since the birth of Pakistan, we have had issues with India, and there are a lot of disputes we are having with India, like that includes Kashmir is one of them. Now the only open air which we can find to breathe is or take a sigh of relief is the Chinese border or the China in terms of that geography or in terms of that region. So even though our governments may align or they are forced to align themselves with United States, they cannot leave China altogether. So at times it's just like, Turkey tries to, keep relations with Russia, but also with the US. So we are forced to keep relations to try to draw a balance between the two, even though it becomes hard. For example, we had this CPEC, which is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and which is a very big thing because the Chinese ships, they used to go all across the Strait of Malacca, down from Singapore and up to Shanghai. And now after the CPEC, which goes through the land, the Pakistani land, I think an average ship saves almost 10,000 or 15,000 kilometers on a single journey, one way. So it's a very big, partnership between Pakistan and China. So on partnerships like that, we did have to see the American anger. Our governments had to, but like you've just mentioned, we try to draw a balance between the two because we are handicapped on both the sides. So we are forced to keep the relations and we cannot tilt either way.
How about the Muslim world? How about, organizations such as the OIC, Muslim states, the major Muslim states such as Saudi Arabia, which have in the past have had strategic interests, and alignments with Pakistan, especially during the time of Afghanistan, for instance. There was a large level coordination between the security and the intelligence apparatus in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. But is that still there? And what about any kind of economic cooperation, any cooperation on regional, international political issues?
Not really. You can call Pakistan still as an important actor of the Sunni bloc and naturally aligned to Saudi Arabia in those terms. But if you talk about the strength of this partnership or relationship, this is not as strong as before. And the reason is which you have just mentioned. So there is no objective as of now that was back there in the Afghan war, which the Saudi Arabia or the Gulf countries want you to serve. So naturally, they do not find a necessity or need to have a very strong relationship with you. Once such an objective would exist, the relationship may strengthen again. Yeah. That's one reason. Then, some time of economic integration or a Muslim bloc, ideally. OIC, everybody knows OIC.
Yeah.
It's just a name, it's powerless. It has no intention to work. So it's meaningless to even talk about OIC or Pakistani's position. I mean, OIC probably is the mouthpiece of few Gulf states. And you've seen its role in this whole conflict over the 7 months. So, I mean, I just saw them yesterday or day before yesterday calling Israel to stop its aggression or something. So that's what they're good at. It took them 7 months to say so.
It's ridiculous.
So OIC is meaningless in terms of the issues of the Muslim countries in terms of the integration between them and anything like, that would be real. But there is some integration or which could happen, on a smaller scale directly between countries whose interests are aligned to each other.
I recall President Erdogan visiting Pakistan a few years ago and speaking of that kind of strategic alliance.
Exactly. If you remember, or if you could recall, there was this conference, or there was this, integration, or this kind of economic union, if I could say, which was planned between these three countries earlier: Malaysia, Pakistan, and Turkey. But at the very last movement, Saudi Arabia pressurized Pakistan to pull out of that integration. So such a thing, if it would have taken place, or if it could have been formed, I think it could have been a very good start. Because you see these three countries having their strengths in their own way. So in terms of the military might, in terms of the atomic power, Pakistan has its strengths. In terms of economy and the regional,
as well as position.
Exactly.
You're talking about the positions that the three countries
exactly as
have.
spread across three continents probably. So obviously that could not happen because of Pakistan unfortunately pulling out under Saudi pressure at the very last minute. And people have claimed that Saudi Arabia went to an extent of saying that we have probably over 2 million workers in Saudi Arabia.
They'll send them all back.
Yeah. So they went to this, I would say, filthy extent to just pressurize Pakistan to not involve itself in any bloc that would be against the Western world. So this is the sad state of affairs, unfortunately. And by the way, it was Imran Khan back then who pulled out.
Yes, and that adds to the sort of, I wouldn't say conspiracy, but the murmurs as to why he was removed. But let me talk about what would be the motivator for the people of Pakistan. What is that galvanizes them? Is it the state of economy, for instance, internally? Is it something that would happen on the borders? Is it Kashmir? Is it relations with their Muslim brethren across the Muslim world? What is it exactly? Is it a change in Western politics and the like? What is it that would galvanize the Pakistani people?
Still, even though it's not as important as before because of these all happenings in the past, but I think if you would want to rank things, it would still be Islam. So basically, a common thing which you can, and obviously, not putting across in very crude terms, but something associated to this would, because we have seen this in 2002 when United States, America attacked Afghanistan. So in the elections that were held right after that in 2002 in Pakistan, that was the only election in which the religious parties had such a big number in the parliament. And if you see the urban centers, the 5 biggest cities of Pakistan, religious parties had the highest number of seats in that election. So over time, it may have lessened in importance, but I think economic issues are important, other issues are important, but along with them, Islam is still a very strong binding force between them. So somehow putting across something Islamic, but in a better, for example, even if you talk about Imran Khan, why is he so popular? Let's not go on how he was changed or whether he was deposed by the US or not. Irrespective of all those facts, there is one fact, and which is that he still is the most popular leader probably in Pakistan and also in the world probably, for Pakistan, around the Pakistani leaders, among the Pakistani politicians. So what was he calling for? The basic slogan or cliche he had in his election rallies, and after he was sworn into government as well, that was to make Pakistan state of Medina. So this sentence is very popular. And he used to start all his speeches with Iyaka na'budu wa Iyaka nasta'in. So even though his actions may not mean that, and I'm sorry to use this word, sometimes I feel our public very hypocritic in this. That's why, I was just saying in an earlier question, you asked that sometimes we believe ourselves to be too Muslim, so we don't even live like Muslims then, because
we're guaranteed.
Exactly, guaranteed thing. So I think there's a verse also that says that, do you think that you would go to Jannah only because you have,
Just
in
because
Surah Ankabut,
you claim to be
exactly.
a Muslim.
So,
Jazakallah khair, Akhi Ahsan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Allah, I'm grateful to you. I learned a lot, wallahi.